morning, and thank you for the opportunity to be with you on a beautiful morning, Tampa morning. And so, I think the world has a lot of problems, and you can take three approaches to it. You can either look at them and just ignore them, and just be happy. You can look at them and complain about them, which is what a lot of people do. Or you can look at them and say, I'm going to do something about it, right? Every problem in this world exists because it's deadlocked. I mean, there's a reason as to why they exist, because of whatever reasons, there's something, it's reached a steady state and it's sort of stuck in that position. So people who sort of look at that and say, I think I can do something different, and then take the initiative to actually solve the problem. And I find that doesn't matter whether it's a small problem or a big problem, they certainly feel very empowered. They feel like they don't have to live the life passively, right? Because they now have the power to actually look at things and change them. And so it's that empowered feeling is what's common about being an entrepreneur. And all of you in this room are people who have self-selected to be one of those people. And so you have your own entrepreneurial journey. And the good thing about that is, number one, you look at every problem, and instead of getting discouraged and be feeling hopeless, you feel like every problem is an opportunity, which is a great way to live. Entrepreneurs, but then once you start solving the problem, there's nothing but trouble, right? And then it's a big emotional roller coaster ride, because you always go back and forth between boredom and getting stressed out, because you try to do it and then you get into trouble, and then you say, why the hell did I ever do this? And so you get into trouble, right? And then so I think, and each one of you have your own personal journey in terms of how you want to do it. Some of you are already deep into that journey, some of you are just thinking about it. But each one journey is very unique. But there are a couple of things that are very common about that. Number one, most of the people who try to do these things tend to be a little naive. And they're very optimistic. And those are not a bad way to live your life. Because if you feel, somehow, entrepreneurs always feel like tomorrow is going to be a better day than today, right? Doesn't matter whether it's real or not. But it's a great way to live your life. I mean, what more can you ask for when you live your whole life feeling that tomorrow is going to be better than today, right? And so being naive and being optimistic are essential characteristics of that journey, because otherwise the roller coaster is too intense to really get through that ride. And so each one of you have your own journeys, and it's unique. It's not like somebody else can come and mentor you and say, do this and everything will be okay and there'll be no problems later, right? So even though each journey is unique, there's a lot that people can do by coming together and sharing their own journeys and learning lessons from each other. So with that spirit, what I'm going to do is, looks like Commissioner Higginbotham was really short this week, so we have plenty of time. So what I'm going to do is, I think you always need a context for the comments that I make. So let me just take about 10-15 minutes and tell you a little about my journey, and then we'll just have a conversation. We'll just have questions and answers. So think about your own journeys and the things that you want to share with everybody else here, or questions that you may have, and then we can have a conversation. So I grew up in India. I went to Indian Institute of Technology in Madras. I graduated a long time ago, 1973, and I graduated in computers, but it was a very different India. Even though I majored in computers, I'd never seen a computer. And then I came to Canada, and then did my master's, taught for a year, got my PhD. I thought I was going to be a professor. But then, as destiny would have it, life changed. And this is probably common to most of your journeys, because serendipity is a big part of that entrepreneurial journey. So I was actually training to be a professor, to be a researcher, but then there was a little startup in Toronto, and but the company had great technology. You know, those days the state of the art was sending about 300 bits per second on the phone line, and this company had figured out how to do 9,600 bits per second, which was like huge. And they technically got everything working, but financially they're not doing well. So the company had to really shut the doors. And the head of engineering, Dr. Peter Brackett, who actually lives in Florida now, you know, had to quit his job, and he came to teach at Queen's University, where I was doing my PhD. And Motorola came and bought that struggling company a year later, and then they asked Peter to come back and be the head of engineering here. So Peter went back to Toronto. About 3 months after that, I got my PhD. So Peter called me up and said, hey Dash, you know, forget all this research and teaching everything else. Why don't you come up here? It's a lot of fun. Because I knew Peter, and I had a lot of respect for him, I just went to Toronto. And so it was even though it was a part of Motorola, it was a little garage operation, 20 people. So the next 4 years, 80 to 84, we went from 20 people to 400 people, $100 million business, highly profitable. And I was one of the 3 who actually was driving that whole thing. So, you know, every time you get an opportunity to work with somebody that you think is good, is always, you know, it pays big dividends, because everything in life is all about benchmarking. And benchmarking is knowing what's possible. If you know what's possible, you'll actually get there. But how do you know what's possible? You only know what's possible if you hang around with people who are great. If you're with Olympic athletes, you set a very different benchmark than you do if you're playing street hockey, right? So I think opportunity to work with excellent people is a very, very important part of the journey. And so, sorry, please. How is that now? Good. In '84, when I and my wife is also from India, she also went to IIT Madras. And so both of us looked at it and said, hey, you know, if we can do this from Motorola, we can do this for ourselves. But then, those days, there was no venture capital in Canada. The only 2 places that had venture capital were Boston and California. And so, through the intercompany transfer, through Motorola, we moved to Boston. So we've been in Boston since 1984. So, you know, again, it's a very naive thing, thinking that a young couple can just move into this strange city and start a company. But that's, you'll always see that to be a common theme. You know, people who think too much, people who have to work every detail out before they can start the journey, are most of the people, they never start. They'll write books, maybe they'll do a lot of good maps and everything else, but it's very hard because you don't quite have answers to all the things before you get going. So finding your passion, finding things that really get you going is a big part of this journey. So we moved there, and then it took about 3 years to get the green card and build our own network in Boston and so on. So as soon as I got the green card, I quit, started a company, which was very hard. You know, my wife used to work, and those days a venture capitalist would not give you any money unless you went without a salary at least for a year. Because, you know, most of their funds used to be very small. Even the biggest venture capital fund would be $20–30 million. So for those guys to actually write you a check for $1 million, that was like a big deal. So they wanted to make sure that the entrepreneur was totally committed. He had to mortgage his wife, kids, everything else, and show that he is just absolutely committed to that whole thing. But finally the dream come true. You know, we raised $3 million from very prestigious venture guys, and my wife quit her job and everything was great. But then about 4 months into it, I and my partner had a difference of opinion in terms of how we do the product. So he was the more senior guy, I was the young guy. So, and you can't have 2 cooks in the kitchen who don't get along, because then it's not good for either one of us. And so one morning I quit. And that was not easy because, you know, we're in a foreign land, no bank balance, mortgage, all that stuff. But then fortunately over the next 6 months or so, I got seed funded to do Cascade Communications,
which we took public in '94. Within 6-7 years, we had 1,000 people, $500,000. We used to carry 80% of the internet traffic. And then, of course, once you have one hit, then it becomes easier. Then I did Sycamore Networks, took about 4 companies public, A123, Airwana, did a lot of companies. And so that's been a nice entrepreneurial journey. But about 14 years ago, when I turned 50, I said, I'd been an entrepreneur for about 20-25 years. So I said, my wife said, let's change the path here a little bit. And so being the entrepreneur and CEO of these things, we'll just become mentors, become people who actually encourage other entrepreneurial ecosystems and make other people do things, because it's a huge leverage. When I was the entrepreneur, I would do 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, and be thankful for that opportunity. So I said, hey, that's the great thing. So you get a lot of other young people to do that stuff and be thankful to you, right? And so I started doing one for-profit, one non-profit every year. But for the last 5 years or so, I've sort of switched almost completely to the non-profit side of it. So let me just take about 5 minutes and tell you a little bit about that journey. And it's not that different from, whether it's for-profit or non-profit, it's the same thing. There's a problem that you see, and you want to find a way to solve it. You have to do something a little different than what people have done in the past. Otherwise, you're banging your head against the same wall, and that doesn't solve any problems. And you still have to do all the same things. You have to make sure that you can put a good team together, you can get good people together, you can raise money, you can innovate, you can sell, you have to build your franchise, all of that stuff, right? So the 2000 is when I joined the board of MIT in Boston. And I didn't go to MIT, but part of the reason why I joined the board is because they were very interested in sort of making MIT a little bit more entrepreneurial. And my intention to join there, and then we set up this Deshpande Center for Technological Innovation. We put $20 million into it. And the motivation for that particular center was most of the companies we did in 70s, 80s, even 90s, the core technology actually came from Bell Labs. Bell Labs came up with lots of great stuff, and they couldn't commercialize, and everybody else would take them off and commercialize their companies. But by year 2000, there was no more Bell Labs. And so the center of gravity for idea generation had clearly moved back to universities. And US spends about $50 billion a year doing research in universities, and about another $100 billion in Fed labs. So the motivation for my involvement and effort at MIT was to see how this $50 billion that we spend could have a more impact. How could they create more opportunities for people like ourselves who actually can take those ideas and make something out of it? And that's been a very successful model. The simple formula behind that is innovation plus relevance is equal to impact. Meaning, if you have a great idea, the great idea by itself does not have an impact. For it to have an impact, it has to be directed to some burning problem in the world, right? So instead of a professor, if they have a desire for impact, because out of the 1,000 faculty at MIT, there's probably about 50 who are more Nobel Prize kind of guys who really are motivated by the beauty of the idea itself, and you need them, and you need to leave them alone. But most of the other 95% always think about impact. They want to cure cancer, they want to do this, they want to do that. And if they have a desire for impact, then instead of the current system, the current innovation system is like engineering was 50 years ago. 50 years ago, engineers designed the whole product, and then the companies hired sales and marketing to peddle the product. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't work. So the best innovators today, they come up with the whole idea, then they patent it, and then the technology licensing offices try to peddle that idea. So instead of that, what happened with the center is that when people have a desire for impact, when they have an idea, you connect them to the relevance right away. So as they navigate through the idea, you can't mandate innovation, you can't say do this, because if you did that, you lose all the value of innovation. So as they navigate through their idea, it's more likely that the idea will have a natural pull in the marketplace. So we've funded about 100 such ideas, small ideas, and about 30 of them have actually become companies. And so it's really changed the whole, the way research is done by professors of graduate students at MIT. A lot of the other universities are interested, so we run a Deshpande University Innovation Network where about 80 universities are a part of that network. They all come together and share the best practices. I co-chair a council for Obama on innovation entrepreneurship, where we're trying to bring that same discipline to all the $150 billion that we spend in the US. NSF, which is a $7.4 billion agency that funds research, based on this model. Together we launched this program called, where they mentor and so on. And so that's been a very successful product. So it's a simple idea, but a powerful idea where if you have people who think tanks or whatever, over the course of time, they become very clubby and move further and further away from the real world. And as they move further away from the real world, they get more into impressing each other, right, as opposed to impact. So connecting them to relevance is a very powerful way to make sure that the people who got the best minds do have an impact in the world. Now, about almost 10 years ago, we started thinking about what can we do something in India, because my wife is also from India and we go there fairly often. And so the first reaction was to do the same center, like the MIT center, in IIT Madras in India, because we both went there. We were already working with those guys and doing a lot of stuff there. But then somehow technological innovation in India didn't sound that exciting. So we said, well, let's see if we can do social innovation. And for social innovation, that equation really gets turned around. It's really relevance plus innovation is equal to impact. Meaning, if you want to cause social innovation, the deep understanding of the problem itself is the core competence, is the key thing. The new idea that you bring to solve the problem does not have to be patentable, does not have to be first time in the world, does not have huge competitive advantage, but a deep understanding of the problem itself is the essence of that social innovation, which is what's missing in the world today. For example, US, we spend a lot of USAID money in Africa and all over the place, but in most of the cases, the experts in India think about a solution, so they lead with innovation, right? They think that if you did this app on the iPad, you're going to solve all education problems. If you did this, if you did that. But so what happens is people are very, it's not like they're bad people. I mean, each one of us want to do what we know how to do and contribute to solving the problem. But the innovators and the entrepreneurs, they tend to always think about innovation and think of that as their contribution, which I think is a mistake. Because whenever you have a new idea and you take to a community that you're trying to help, it doesn't stick there. So we came up with this idea called the Social Innovation Sandbox. The idea being, how do you make people there innovative and you just become a catalyst? So we took about 5 districts in India. This is north of Bangalore. And we've been there for about 8-9 years now. It's gotten into a fairly major program. We've got about 150 people on the payroll. We're building a pretty big campus. And we've had maybe 120 young men and women from here. US go spend time there. But like I said, they're only catalysts. They're not the people who are actually going to champion anything, right? But you need that. You need other people going and giving ideas and so on. So within the Social Innovation Sandbox, it's been a pretty satisfying experience. So to create this local leadership, we did a bunch of things. Number one, we got the college kids, a lot of the college kids in India, I started off by saying, you see problems and you ignore them. That's what happens in India, right? I mean, there's lots of problems and people just complain at most. The older guys complain, the younger guys ignore, right? So we said, well, let's see if we can change that. So we get 4 college kids to come together, pick a problem in the society and solve it, right? And that's a very empowering thing for them, because suddenly they feel like they don't have to be passive in life anymore. When a professor gives you a problem to solve, it's homework. When you pick a problem to solve yourself because of your own passion, it becomes an entrepreneurial opportunity. And that's a subtle difference, right? And so today we have 10,000 students in this small area doing 2,500 projects, right? So that's like massive, critical mass. We have a program to train young men and women to be entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs. And so this year we're up to training 1,300 and we're building a campus to take that up to 4,000. So what that does, it creates an ecosystem of a lot of these young people who are just entrepreneurial, who just want to get things done, who want to work hard, who want to, not because somebody says work hard, just because you get hooked on it, right? And then we're working with a lot of the social interventions where we do the same way you do a company, right? I mean, you first say, what is the innovation? We fund that innovation, may work, may not work, doesn't matter. If it works, you have to be able to scale it. And you scale it by a good financial model, and the financial models are usually, some interventions lend themselves to a free market economy, where people can pay for it, and so you can scale it just by free market economy. Sometimes it's innovation that you bring to a government program, because government is the one that spends the most amount of money on any of these interventions. So if you can make them really work and bring innovation to them, that's a good thing. Or you make it a very broad-based charity. And in most of the cases, it always turns out to be a combination of all the three. And so once it becomes sustaining, then you scale them. Because the world, doesn't matter whether it's US or India, you know, all these social interventions where you help 10 people, 100 people, 1,000 people, you know, that doesn't go anywhere. I mean, you really have to bring a systemic change where you're actually impacting a big, huge part of that population. And so we have about 50 interventions that we're working on, and some of them have scaled to millions. So just to give you a taste of what's possible, let me just take about 4 or 5 minutes and tell you about this one intervention. This is not a fundraiser, so you don't have to take checks out and write checks for this. That actually we're doing tomorrow. In fact, Raj and Desh, where are you? Oh, there. So Raj is actually, and Desh, they're both hosting a get-together tomorrow at 10 o'clock, just to talk a little bit more about this particular topic. So if any of you are interested, please contact Piali. Stand up, Piali, there. So Piali is the director of this organization, and so she can give you the information if you want to come. But this next 4 or 5 minutes I'm going to talk about is mostly just to tell you what's possible. We do similar things in teaching science to rural children. That's up to 1 million children. We do a lot of things with the farmers, you know, growing paddy, tree farming, health. So a lot of these are not interventions that we come up with. These are the interventions that some other entrepreneur, some other passionate people say, hey, I think I have a solution. It's just like a venture capital world, or what all of you do in your business. And then you just give them a hand. You know, you help them with process, we help them with ideas, we help them with connections, and so on. So this one particular organization, you know, a lot of the children in India come hungry to school. So this organization said, well, maybe I can use advanced engineering, supply chain, procurement, accounting, all the good things, and maybe solve this problem. So they built a kitchen, and in that kitchen, Kunal was off by a couple of orders of magnitude. They don't make 2,000 meals a day, they make 200,000 meals a day, right? And it's a local produce, local cuisine, so it's food that children really love, as opposed to a lot of the interventions we do in Africa from US, where we take soybean milk, you know, all that stuff. It's because designed by some expert here, right? Nutrition expert. So it's food that children really love. It costs only 12 cents to make a meal. $30 feeds your child for the whole year. We serve only the government schools, and the government has a program for midday meal. So the government actually gives us the money they would have spent otherwise, and their budget is $15. So they give us the 15 and we raise the other 15. So it's a combination of the innovation to government program and what we do. So a lot of the problems that we think are very hard to solve are actually not that hard compared to the world that we all live in. You know, each one of you get up in the morning, and when you go to work, you know, you have to compete like crazy because you live in a world which is extremely competitive. And it's like Olympics. I mean, you don't win by a mile, you win by a nose length, right? So execution excellence is given in your profession. That's what you do every day morning. And if you can bring just a little bit of that execution excellence and combine that with a compassion, it's amazing what you can do. So most of these problems that we can solve are not that hard. So our Clinton Global Initiative, there were 2,800 commitments. And last week was the annual event in New York. And it was the 10th year anniversary. So President Clinton wanted to pick one to visit, and he picked this one. So I was with President Clinton for a whole week. We went and visited this kitchen in India, and then we went to Vietnam and Indonesia and Australia to look at all the interventions and so on. And what is common among all these are these basic themes, is how do you bring the execution excellence of the for-profit, which you cannot survive without it because it's a very naturally competitive market. If you doze, you're out of business. You serve bad food in a restaurant for a couple of days, you're out of business, right? So execution excellence in the for-profit, if you combine that with the passion of the non-profit, compassion of the non-profit, and similarly bring a little bit of the compassion of the non-profit to the for-profit world, I think we can all create a better world. So about 4 years ago, originally we sort of were thinking about US needs technological innovation, India needs social innovation. And then about 4 years ago, after we had the success of this social innovation sandbox, where we have about 50 of these different interventions, all sort of coming up, some more successful than others, we said, well, maybe our thinking is a little bit skewed and wrong. So India needs technological innovation because India still needs to build a lot of the infrastructure, power and water and all that stuff. And US needs social innovation. So we brought the social innovation sandbox to US. So in Massachusetts, there are these towns called Lowell and Lawrence. Lowell and Lawrence used to be the textile headquarters of the world. And then, of course, textile has moved out. And so Lawrence is the 41st poorest town in the United States. Huge 40% unemployment, all the things that you see and this happens pretty much in every city. So we brought the same approach to US. We said, instead of people waiting for somebody else to come and help them, can we bring the same power of innovation entrepreneurship that you have in this part of the world to them? And so it's been a very successful program. And so we just rebranded that just a couple of weeks ago as Entrepreneurship for All. And E for All is a new way to do economic development. So in this particular town last year, we had 1,000 people come out of the woodworks to participate in the pitch contest. Because a lot of these people, they don't have a lot of means, so you can't really start with a venture capital, business plan, everything else. So you just say, hey, do you have an idea? Do you have a passion? And so we did these pitch contests in Spanish and English. And out of the 1,000 people, every 6 months, we run an accelerator program. We pick about 15 to 20 of them and go through 12 weeks of acceleration. And we have about 120 mentors who are all successful people like yourselves who actually come and mentor these people. And so far, in the last year and a half or so, we've done about 60 of these people, and out of which quite a few of them are up and running. And some are tech, some are non-tech, some are for-profit, some are non-profit, some are high growth, some are very lifestyle kind of things. And so this is the sort of, we think, is a new way to do economic development in these economically depressed places. And US has about 250 such places where the economy is really far below par because all the new innovation and globalization is just doing this, right? And so the E for All is something that we are trying to now scale it to take it to all the 250 places. It may take a little bit longer because we have to raise a lot of money, we have to do a lot of stuff. But the old economic development was people coming, the government's coming, building a huge infrastructure, inviting large companies and hoping that they'll hire people. That's not going to happen anymore. I think we somehow have to get everybody who wants to help themselves to be entrepreneurial and get all excited about doing something, bringing a change, and making a living for themselves, not just for themselves, but for a lot of other people that they work with. And so E for All is something which is very much like this approach. and we're hoping that we can successfully launch it in lots of other places. And then we have a similar program in Canada. So even though Canada, US, India, MIT, they're all very different environments, there's, the topic that we're all going to talk about all day today is something that's very common to all of these efforts. And so this entrepreneurial journey, the purpose of the journey could be different, but the elements of that journey, the excitement, the problems, the roller coaster, all of that stuff is, I think, common to all of these. And I think we're all blessed in this room to have been the self-selected us to be a part of this journey, and I wish you all the best in your journey. So thank you.